How's that now? Good? Happiness? Happiness?
Give it a minute, 2 minutes. Now you're live, for sure. That's you.
I'm live. I'm live in Nairobi. So you put something in my stories, huh?
Yeah.
IG. Welcome to the live. Sorry about, I was 3 minutes late. I ended up in the wrong live, huh? But we're here, good to see you all. Do I have a reel out there? Do I have a reel out there? No. Cool. I'm just waiting for, what? I'm waiting for another minute so I can get a small quorum, then we begin, huh? You saw the topic of the day? I put out a poster earlier in the day, and the poster says, I'm getting it right, the hardest line I ever wrote in this book. The hardest line I ever wrote in this book. The book that I'm talking about, in case you're wondering why I'm live, by the way, is Strength and Sorrow. How does that look? Is that the way around, huh? Okay, Strength and Sorrow. It always looks backwards. Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, it's lovely to be back home. It's nice to be in Nairobi. I came in like last evening, so yeah, it's just nice. And then Nairobi it's familiar. You come back, it's like the way the what do you call it? The cell phone switches, huh? That's what it feels. It's like I've just changed networks. I'm back here. Everything is familiar. I was on Nduthi to the studios. I'm in a place called, what is the studios called, Gabantu? Gabantu, very famous guy, by the way. Just check him out. Gabantu Studios. It's out in State House, right near the president's residence. Fun fact, right outside Gabantu's office, State House, remember where the former Hillcrest School used to be? If you read the book, the first story I have, I write about an accident that happened. I almost died right outside here. Just here, literally, 100 meters away. So it's kind of interesting about the cycle of life, that I'll be back here doing a live in a place where literally I was about to lose my life on a motorbike right outside here, literally. We're talking about like less than 50 meters. Yeah, so right outside here. So it's nice to be back. Thank you everybody for joining. Wambua, thank you for coming. Christine Oruo, thank you. Paul Jaguna, thank you so much for joining us. I'll just get right into it because I don't like to waste people's time, huh? And the book is out. You might have seen it. If you have not, Strength and Sorrow, which is my memoir, my first debut book. For those who know me, I've been writing for about 28 years now, and it's just nice to finally have a book together. It's quite a dense book. It's got a lot in it. I've been fortunate to have a couple of reviews done. If you check out my Substack, or if you go to my LinkedIn, I put out a review by Professor Ambassador Bitanga Ndomo, who is our ambassador in Belgium and the EU. So he's done a beautiful post. I don't want to spoil it. I think you should go read it. Now the prompt then for this live was another review that was done. But let me just do some house rules of how I do this thing. Huh? So typically the lives are basically just conversations. We talk. I kind of started out with a basic breakdown of what the issue of the day is. Then we yak. At some point, you feel like you want to chime in, you can put a question in there. So I respond to your text or your message, just put it in the comments. And then we just have a kind of a free-flowing conversation. It's very kind of stream of conscious conversations. but we go deep. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to just speak as you are, right? So those are the rules. Yeah, so I guess that's it. And so if you feel like asking anything, just put it in the comments. But let me get right into it. If you go to my Facebook page, I'm digging it up now. There's a guy called Alphonse Shiundu, who I know from Afrobarometer. He does this really good checklist, fact-checking website, huh? And been running for a very long time. So he really does a really good job at it. And he recently did a review for me that I thought was a brilliant review. I didn't know him as a reviewer, actually. So I was really, how do I say, you're kind of humble, really, to be honest, huh? To be humble. Because, when somebody says nice things about your books and you didn't actually buy them any beer in your life, you don't particularly, we haven't really hung out. So it's just a really honest opinion. And then he says things about the book that I didn't even realize were in the book, So I find that incredible and beautiful. So, Alphonse, first of all, thank you. But it says a lot of things, but I just want to get right into the part that really, grabbed me, right? For the guys who are joining us, like Andeto, Oburu, Karibu Sana. So I'll give you some background, kidogo. So it starts by saying this. It's a Facebook thing. You can read it if you want. It's on my page. It says, I don't really know. I don't really know. I really don't know. It's the way he wrote it. I don't really know. When I read that line on page 49 of Oyunga Pala's new book, Strength and Sorrow, all this permutation showed up in my head. There was a reason he wrote it in that way. I read it again. I don't really know. What came before those words, what came after, explains everything in those words. The reality of not knowing what to make of certain things, the unsettling guesswork of trying to make sense, to rationalize, when all you know is really unknowable. All right, that's the context. Let me take you back to the actual page in the book, right? Page 49. Page 49 is part of a chapter that deals with my brother, the boxer, right? And I said, let a person who doesn't know how to die look at the ox. So the brief is that the story of my brother Oti. Oti is my eldest brother. We were 6 in the family. The eldest was Nyangi, and then there was Oti. And Oti, when he's like about, 18 years old, he was shipped off to India. This is 1978. 1978. Some of you, your parents are that old. 1978. He was shipped off to India, a place called Varanasi, which is like the Hindu capital. And then he went to a place called Chandigarh, and he stayed in India for 9 years. And when John came back, there was a lot going on with this cohort that went to India. There's a lot of unsaid stories about India that we never talk about. And John went through a whole series of challenges that I won't kind of spoil for you, because I want you to read the book, actually. And we were really tight with John. We were like buddies, huge age difference, but we hung out always together. So when John died, in the way that he died, I needed to make sense of it. And when the funeral was happening, I did what a younger brother would do, because John had 3 kids. And I just did the stoic thing, you show up, you do a good funeral, you keep your word, you promise that, in front of the gathering, that his kids may have lost a father, but they'll never lack a father. And you kind of step into the role. But obviously there's a lot you don't know. There's a lot of suppressed anger you're not dealing with. There's a lot of kind of unanswered questions that you can't answer. So when I started writing this book, and I started writing Oti's chapter, the beginning of the chapter starts with the boxing incident. So I recall, because Oti was a boxer, and his claim to fame in India was that he became one of the first district champions, the first African district champion in Varanasi. So I write the story of the fight that actually put him to that position, right? And then it becomes the build-up, but then I try and make sense of Oti's life after that. Because Oti then lives India as a boxer, comes into Nairobi, tries to fit in, doesn't quite work, then goes to Kisumu and joins the police reservist. And he kind of just thrives in it. It's like we say, an atudo in water, which is a turtle in water. He just thrives in it, becomes really good at it. And then, of course, the circumstances of that policing work, that ends, and he has to find work in what we call the security business. So that becomes kind of like Oti's life. But eventually when Oti dies in the way that he dies, there's a lot of regret for me. One, as a brother, because the night that he was dying, he tried to reach me, and my phone was literally off. His wife called and tried to reach him, and my phone was off. And I was sleeping in a different town. So it just, I kind of felt like I'd lost something. Like, what did he want to tell me? You know, there must have been something that I've lost. And so when I started to put together his story, I put it all together, and then I came to this part. And I want to just kind of read it out slowly so you can get some context. Huh? Then maybe you guys can prompt a discussion. So in the aftermath of Oti's death, I thought it practical to be stoic to honor his memory after the burial. He left behind a widow and 3 children, and I knew I had to step into that void. Oti's kids had lost their father, but they would not lack a father. We had walked side by side as brothers, despite our age difference, supporting each other through much. Yet there were things I couldn't discuss with him, depths he insisted on exploring alone. How do you reach a man who hides his pain? How do you respond to what remains unsaid? Perhaps I had misread Oti's strength and stoicism. He was not trying to be strong. He had simply taken full responsibility for his condition, and his aloneness must have stemmed from the inner contemplation required to accept one's fate. I don't really know. I don't really know. Sometimes the most courageous acts are performed silently. While we are all wounded in our own ways, we can learn from those who face illness without complaints. I don't really know. That's the point. I don't really know. It was one of the hardest lines I didn't think about it at the time, you know, but it was until Alphonse brought it up in that review that I looked at it and realized, damn, you know, that was hard. I don't really know. And even as I remember even the sub-editor who was going through the book, when he looked at Oti's thing, he said, you know, this is a really deep story. You might want to talk to Oti's children before you kind of publish the story, you know, because he had read some stuff in it that was really heavy. There's a lot of unsaid stuff. And if anybody knows either a brother or a sibling or somebody or an uncle who went through India, India has its own kind of mystique that we never quite delve into. In a way, the students who went to India become a bit like the forgotten ones. Their stories are buried, and if they don't do too well in life, it's assumed, yeah, whatever happened in India stays in India. And if they do well in life, then it's considered an exception. So that was the trauma of India that I was trying to address. There's a lot more that I need to unpack that I couldn't say in this chapter. But for all that I could pack in, I still didn't know. I still had no idea. So that was the line. I think that was like one of the hardest lines for me to write. I didn't realize that until Alphonse brought it up. There's another line I need to write describe in the book, because now I realize it can't be just in one line. There's got to be more than one. Now, in my sister's chapter, which is kind of the culmination of the book, it's the longest chapter. It's like chapter 16. Chapter 16. So you got to work your way, plow yourself through the book, get to chapter 16. And I need to describe how my sister died. And I try not to kind of do spoiler alerts here, but I need to describe how my sister died. And how I got the message was really hard, because my sister's going through this condition. She has a heart condition, and anything could happen at any time. She could collapse at any time. So I'm on standby. I live in the Netherlands. She's out in Entebbe. So we're like literally on phone like 2 or 3 times a day, you know? Checkups. So I check up in the morning, I check up on midday, and I check up in the evenings. Some days are good, we can talk for a long time. Some days she can barely talk. Some days it's only texting. Now what is happening is that towards the end of this time, towards the end of her death, she's actually appearing to be stronger. We've just got a diagnosis very recently from the guy who was doing the x-ray that tells her the aorta that was burst has actually healed. So I'm actually more optimistic. I'm not as anxious. And then suddenly, I get a call from my cousin who lives in Uganda and tells me something has happened, but somebody will be reaching out to you. Somebody had called him, telling them that, I think Oyunga's sister's not doing too good. You might need to reach him. So I'm anticipating this call. And I get this call, and this guy tells me things are not good. You know, when a guy starts telling me about it, hey, yeah, things are not good. And of course, I ask him why. And he says, there are flies outside our door. And we have called the police. And then, punde si punde, so then I have to wait, because he's waiting for the cops to come. You know, so I'm just chilling there, and I'm in the Netherlands, imagine. So I had to go out somewhere by next to another lake. There's another lake I like to chill out by, you know. I have my drinks there, just as I contemplate, and I think of by the lakes, oh Babylon. My voice is terrible, but you know what you get the point, eh? You're in the rivers of other seas, as you remember your own waters. So I go to that place as a kind of contemplation point. So I'm waiting for the next call. This bagger doesn't even call me. What he does, the police come in, obviously, and they break in, and they find my sister in a state. This guy takes pictures and sends them to me. So I'm receiving that horror like then. And of course, you know, respond quickly, do what you have to do as a man, you know, get my backside to Entebbe and take care of business. But then later, I need to contemplate whether this line should make the book. Because it's a very it's a very raw scene. I mean, if somebody was done movies or TV, you can understand. It's a very raw scene, and I need to describe it, and I describe it as honestly as possible, but I need to describe it in order for you to realize the emotion that I went through, in the hope that it mirrors somebody who might have gone through a similar challenge in their life. Writing that line was not easy. So, those two have been the hardest lines for me. They're the hardest lines to deal with my siblings. One is my bro, how he died from a point of regret. The second is my sister, how she died, just the cruelty of her death. Despite everything we'd done, there's a kind of helplessness about death sometimes. I was reading somebody's Facebook post today, a friend of mine who I wouldn't name, but he was saying that during his, when his mother passed, he didn't realize how angry he had become. You know, he kind of internalized it. And he didn't realize that grief sometimes is like love that has nowhere to go. So the guy started just lashing out, and he started lashing out at everybody. And it took him a long time to realize it, you know, because it's been months since his mother passed. But he realized he's just been angry. He's been lashing out on do the guys. He's been lashing out at people in the office. He's just been this really angry guy. And it's until he was able to reflect back, then he realized, oh shit, this is suppressed grief that I'm not dealing with. And so then he comes on his post and he asks for basically forgiveness for what he was going through. But for me, it was one of those situations of that if I'm able to then really describe it, then people then can also mirror their own grief. So if you've ever been in a position where the death was so cruel, and the guy is asking himself, I did everything, you know, I was that son. I was there for my mother, you know, I was doing the trips, and I was on point of medication. I organized my life around her treatment, but I still couldn't save her. What do you take with that regret? What do you take with that anger? I can take you back to my original story. So my book is based on 3 family members. My father, who are called my loved ones, my father, my brother, and my sister. So I do the trajectory of the 3 as a kind of a journey of grief. So I start out with my dad, who when he dies, it's just, what's the word? You're bamboozled. You know the word, you know? It's a nice word. Big jungle word. Bamboozled. You have no idea. Butua. The Swahili version is butua. You have no idea what to do with it. So what do you do as a young man? You suppress. That anger plays out in high school, and I end up getting expelled from school, and I become a very kind of suppressed guy. The outlet that saves me to some degree in hindsight, now that I think about it, turns out with the rugby field. Because I start to play rugby, and rugby allows you to kind of channel aggression in a way that's actually healthy. You know, because rugby, you can be tough with guys, but then after the match, you sit down, exchange a beer, and you kind of just ease out. So you don't carry anger around, right? So that was and then that period, I started doing my own internal work, trying to find out, what are my issues? You know, why am I angry? Why am I suppressed? Why am I anxious about these things? And in my own reflection, that grew. Then there's my brother. So when my dad is dying, I'm just a spectator. All the elders, everybody's organized things, I'm just a spectator. I'm a teenager, watching the scenes, what's going on, and I'm mimicking behavior. By the time my bro dies, I'm quote unquote a young elder now, you know. Something has happened where the guys people look at and say, hey, Oyunga, what do we do? And in Luo we say, go come, you know, like we put down the chair and we say, What's the plan? What does the family want? And I'm looking up at my mother and she's saying, you're making the calls. So by the time my brother's dying, I'm in this state of responsibility. You know, I know how to conduct a good funeral. But do I know anything about grief or emotion? Zilch. Nothing. All I know is how to be stoic, strong. You know, don't shed your tears. You know, be strong for the kids. Take care of business. The grief part, no. The gift, and I say this with all reverence, the gift of my sister is that because the sickness is prolonged, so you're stuck with the duty of care. You know, you have to sit there and you have to just kind of wait. But then also there's the anxiety of something could happen. The fortune of my sister's story is that she then is telling you that I'm ready. It could happen. So then I'm forced to really contemplate that what does it mean to live in the present? Because I could worry about the fact that, oh God, she's going to die. What are we going to do? And panic all through. What use is that for the person who's going through the state? What use is that to the person? So I have to find a way of holding my own anxiety in. And that was the first time I was able to just focus on the present. She's here. Make the most of it. I can speak to her today. Be grateful, you know. She had a good day. Be grateful, you know. Those little things. And so by the time my sister is coming through, irrespective of how painful that loss was, I had grown tremendously. So the book is really just about my journey. How I moved from a point of fear to a point of what I think is strength to a place of true surrender, which is where the true growth happens. Because when you truly surrender is where the true growth happens in a space of grief. Okay, I've yacked. I want to see if there's any comments so far, but I hope it's making sense what I'm trying to say, you know? For those who might have just joined in right now, I'm discussing my book, Strength and Sorrow, and typically what I do every Thursday is do these lives where we just kind of talk about things that kind of inspired me and things that kind of came out during the writing process. And what I'm talking about today is the hardest line I ever wrote. And the two hardest lines I ever wrote involved my siblings, which is my brother and my sister. And in particularly, in my sibling story is that even as great as my storytelling could have been, I still didn't know. Like, I really wanted to be there at the last moment for him to tell me, hey, dude, it's going to be okay. I'm a strong guy. You take care of my kids, take care of my wife, you know. It's been great. We've had really, that's what I was thinking, you know. I wanted something like that. Closure, basically. I wanted closure so badly, but I didn't get it. And I didn't know what to do with that, right? With my sister, it's not quite closure in a kind of a neat way, but what I realized is there was the preparation that prepared me for the loss, which then allowed me to then be able to take all of that beautiful information and put it in a text that I hope will help a lot of people. So that's the gist of it. I just wanted to acknowledge some people here. Caroline is telling me she's greeting me from Manchester, UK. Thank you so much, man. You know, I always appreciate when people take time to come out. And she says something about the, oh yeah, she's from the NGO Whisper Center for Social Impact. So, guys, that's the story of, of just how lines are. But let me just kind of, as you guys are thinking about, I mean, just thoughts you could give me, you know, like things we could interact. But then if you feel like asking any questions in regard to grief, in regard to storytelling, in regard to your own process, if you're going through loss right now and you've got some big questions you need to unpack, please just put them there. I'm really good at kind of digging into anxieties and just, you know, making sense out of complex issues. The thing about this writing process was this, if you look at if you read the book, I break it down into, you might see that, I break it down into 4 parts: family, country, forgotten ones, and meditations. So, family, of course, I start with myself, which is that, okay, I have a near-death experience, and I have to ask myself, what's the point of this life, you know? Because I realize that I can't stop it from happening, you know. You come from that really humbling position of where you can die, bro. You know, you're not special, not exception. People are dying all around you every day, you know, all around the world. What do you do? You know, I was completely helpless. It was, and that's why it's very significant that I'm back here in the actual spot, like less than 50 meters from the spot where I nearly died, you know, where the motorcycle, where I was knocked by a Hilux truck, and I was lying on that tarmac at about 10:15 in the morning, on a Tuesday morning in October, right? 2010, right here, you know. So you can think about it. 2010. Look at all those years, and the memories are still fresh in a way, you know. The difference is, of course, I've learned how to accept and sit with my grief. So just right here, so I was forced to then confront that question of like, okay, if you died, what is the point of your life? Like, what is it? Like, was I going to be reduced to kind of like a professional? Was that the extent of my life? Like, what is the point of my life? So that was the point where I started to really ask the hard questions. And one of the things I then did was to move back to the village, right? Because I kind of had it in Nairobi life at the time. And I moved back to the village for a number of reasons. One is that I literally need to recover physically. So though I had not had any like, none of my bones were broken or anything, which is a miracle in itself. We always thank God. But then of course I had flesh wounds, and of course there was the trauma of just being hit. So I needed a place where I could slow down, because Nairobi was just, as you know, the grind. So I went back to Shags. The fortune of my work is that I can work remotely, because I'm a writer, well before remote writing happened. So I was able to just go back Shags and start to chill. Now, the person then who really grounds me the time I'm Shags is my bro OT. So you can see how these things are interconnected. So then, as a result of me, when you think about, they say this thing, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. So what I think is like a really bad incident takes me to Shags and puts me in a really close position with my brother. And we have some really close, tight years, because OT dies 4 years after that. So if I had not gone to Shags, I would have missed the essence of OT, you know, like my bro. So we're really tight with him, you know, and then he passes on. And in learning how to process OT's loss, I become very close to my sister, because suddenly we're like, dude, just the two of us can really understand we're really close to our brother. So like we really understand what he was about. So what happens is then I become very deliberate with being close to my sister. So for example, when I move out of the country to the Netherlands and she moves to Uganda, I make it a point to visit her. Not once, not twice, but many times. So by the time she's actually dying, I actually know what to do. Because I've been in Uganda more than one time. I've been in Entebbe several times. I know guys around Entebbe. You know, I've got like a crew. So it was then kind of, despite the challenges, it was quite easy to then to put things together. Like there was a core crew. So I was not exactly a foreigner in that country. The trigger, if we rewind back, goes back to 2010, me lying on the tarmac and State House, wondering, is this how I die? And that comes the trigger comes the real trigger, which is that if you truly embrace the art of dying, then you must embrace the art of living. Because it's like two sides of the same coin. There's no separation. And that has been my lesson. And that's what I try and condense in this book. But I'm not just talking about myself. As you know, as writers, we can be a little bit navel-gazing. I go further. I talk about country. And I'm talking about country from a point of generationally, you know? So one, there's those of us who are called the Nyaya era generation, those of us who completed our 844 under, may he rest in peace, you know, Daniel Arap Moi, you know? And I don't really critique Moi the man, because a man is a man and a man has his flaws and power is power. But I critique Moism and what it stood for and what it represented and how it affected us in our lives. And then I try and break down, you know, from those of us who grew up in the Nyaya era, those of us who were fed on the school milk, you know, can you imagine when I was going to Kilimani Primary, my first impressions of Moi is like Father Christmas. He's this guy who drives on Agwin Skodek, he stops and he comes out of the car and it's like, you know, it's like, I don't know, something out of an alien movie. He comes out of the car and he's got his rungu and he's waving. And he always has some goodies, you know, some sweets, some puru, something, you know. And it's just, and people who shook his hand, you don't wash your hand for days. You know, it was like, I shook Moi's hand. That's how big this guy is. By the time I'm getting to campus, this guy's a tyrant. It's like nobody wants to, like everybody, Moi must go, Moi must go. We're out in Karura supporting Wangare Maathai. You know, we're all part of the revolution, the younger people. By the time Moi dies, he has vacated power. Kibaki has taken over. You've had that 5 years of, you know, Yote Zakana, and then boom, the old structures fall back. When we're looking at Moi again, we're thinking, okay, there's a lot about this guy we missed. You know? So I'm trying to unpack this guy. What did it mean to really live under a dictatorship? What did it mean to live under suppression? And how did we act it out? And if you really read that story, then you get to understand why a lot of what is the leadership now, the Gen Xers, have these funny peculiar tendencies that they do. It literally cries from that era, the Moi era. And then in terms of country, I try and talk about all of the greats that for me especially, you know, in the artistic field. So I talk about people like Mzee Ojwang, people like Wahome Mtai, the way they die. It forces me to realize in my job then as a public quote-unquote servant, somebody who writes, you know, and is trying to, is somebody who's writing and trying to educate the public. What's the point? What's the point? You know, you could write all the greatest words, you know, but life is life. So that's me trying to kind of unpack it all. Let me try and get into some questions. I've been talking too much. I saw a question here. Bet, good to see you there. 1 second, let me just try and get it. Agi, good to see you. Agi is here, man. Eva, thank you for the acknowledgement all the way from Amsterdam. Thank you. Okay, there we go. I think Carl has something for me. Carl says, please talk about how you as a man came to a place where you realized, let me finish the rest of it. Oh, sorry, fat fingers. There you go. Okay, there you go. Okay, please talk about how you as a man came to a place where you realized you had to deal with anger and grief. I asked this question because many men struggle to get there. Thank you. Okay, I'll try and get into it as well. And then Moses Otieno asked me, why do you feel the urge to isolate yourself from everybody after loss? Okay, so I guess it's twofold. It's twofold, but it kind of speaks to the same issue. One is that, let's speak to anger first. You know, and I really won't speak as a psychologist, but I'll just speak as myself and what I've learned over the years. Is that, you know, as men, we don't have a range of emotions, you know. We don't have a range of emotions that we express, you know. So, like, think of a drunk, like a drunk, you know, Mulevi. It's either a happy drunk or it's an angry drunk. You know, you never quite get the in-betweens. You know, it's like the guy is, you know, the happy drunk. So if you imagine if you had an alcoholic father, with all due respect to those men suffering from that crisis, if you had an alcoholic father, two responses, and if you listen to men's stories, two versions will come up. It was like, he was so happy he was reckless, you'd go to a bar and buy everybody drinks. Or you'd have the other version, which is that when you're drunk, he'd get angry, he'd beat mom, and we'd have to lock ourselves in. So, men are basically socialized not to show emotion. So then our emotions, and the reason why if we show emotion, that's why we say, oh, you're a softie, you know? You're too effeminate. You know, when you're crying, you know, that's why you don't show tears. You've got to be like Ndume, a man. You don't show emotions. So we tend to then operate on two emotions. Like, yes, there's a range of emotions on the inside, but the ones we are quote-unquote allowed to express by society, through the power of example, is anger or elation, happiness. You know, so you're really happy, you're pop, or you're angry. Anger is people expect you to be angry. Even to the point that you find even some women within relationships, they can't deal with a man who can't get angry, who can't lose his cool. Like, what kind of man are you? I need you sometimes to just be angry. So there's a sense of, I know that, okay, because this is what they've been socialized to deal with. This is how they knew that a man truly saw them when he was able to express himself fully and until he was angry. So that's one thing. So imagine you've been socialized that way. Then grief happens, like loss happens, I mean. You know, you have a very kind of significant person in your life, and then suddenly, God forbid, they have died. You know, so what do? You take responsibility for that loss. And especially if you're kind of like a caregiver, like if you're the responsible son, or, you know, in my case, you know, a caring sibling, or, you know, or it could be the other case. It could be your parent who's lost a child, right? And so you suffered loss. The thing is that once you've been through the process, you've got to start asking yourself, what could I have done better? And since you don't have enough of a range of emotions, you only fall back on two that they're allowed to express. One is anger, and anger, you're afraid of it, which ties into the question that Moses was saying. Because you know yourself when you get angry. You know how crazy you can be. So what do? You keep quiet. It's like when a man is in an argument with a significant other, like in an argument with your wife. You know that space? Where you know you're right, you know? Or even if she's right, you know you're right. And she's going on and going on and going on. And the emotion that's coming to you is anger. You want to speak up. But you know if you speak up, she's going to give you a counter. And it's going to be a back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And before you know it, you're angry. And then you'll be held accountable for your anger. So what do men do? They just keep quiet. And if you're not sure that you can hold it, what do? You look for a safe house. You walk out. You walk away. In fact, that's the one advice all men are socialized to be. It's like walk, brother, walk. Count to 10. 1, 2, count to 10, and then walk. That's all we know. So we grow up socialized to then suppress. Then you can imagine, so this is just relational. You and your wife in the harmony of relationship, things are going wrong, you want to raise something, you don't know how to express vulnerability because you have been shamed throughout your life for being vulnerable. So what do? You hide in the idea that's why if you read the testimony of all men who have lost jobs, you know, a guy who was working, he was a kind of a go-to guy, a guy who was very prosperous, then suddenly loses his job. What's the one thing they tell you? It's the shame. If you listen to Jimmy Gatto's story, Jimmy Gatto gives a really powerful story on Engage Talk. You know, you can find it on YouTube. The shame. So because the moment you try and tell guys, man, chief maze, nimesota, I'm broke. And you're trying to be, people can't even hold in your shame. You're like, what do you mean? It's like, the thing is like, dude, man, just sort, you know, be a man, sort out your shit. They don't realize that you're slipping and you're slipping and you're slipping. So then what's the opposite of that? Then you become angry because now nobody's listening to you. And so when people try and shame you, what do? You lash back. These are your two emotions that you carry. This is just in day-to-day relationships. You can imagine, no? In things that you can recover. You know, you can lose a job, you can recover. Then imagine, kaboom. Life hits you with loss. And it hits you with loss in a bad way. You know, you've spent hard money, you've been taking care of your mother in hospital, you know, you've been impoverished, you've been trying to, you're on WhatsApp groups, you've been trying to raise money, people who owe you money can't even make a contribution. And despite all of that, you lose a parent, you lose a child. What do you do, man? Where do you go? Where do you take that emotion? That's why we need to have these conversations. That's the long and short of this of the query, Catherine, is we need to have these conversations because we need to speak first of all as men because we're never given permission to grieve. And trust me, there's a lot to grieve about in this country. There's a lot to grieve about. If you're awake, if you're alert, if you're looking about, there's a lot to grieve about. But we don't know how to. So what do? We bury it, we take care of business, and we move on. But all that is suppressed always rises. And so that has been the lesson. And the reason, as Moses, you were saying, the reason we step out, why do isolate ourselves? It's because we don't trust anybody to listen to us. I mean, if I ask the men here, like, how many guys can you truly go to with your deepest pains? How many that you can truly trust? Jimmy Gatto gives a perfect example during his talk. And he says, you call a guy, you know, and you're broke, and you want some petty cash, you know, like literally, you know, like for dinner that day, or like, just get me home. You call a guy, and you can hear a guy in the background saying, you've been put on speaker, and he said, oh, where did Jimmy Gatto? Where did Jimmy Gatto? Like a guy mocking you. How many variations of that story do we know? You know, of where our closest people literally turn on us. You know, and sometimes not even how they say it, it's just how they look at you. how they respond, their actions. You know, they can say, oh, so, daddy, pole, but their actions, you know, the unsaid. So where do you go? You self-isolate. Because this is all you know. I'll take care of myself. I'll take care of my business. I'll rise. I will show them. Which is the next emotion you flip into? Anger. I will show them. Or they think I'm done. I will show them. Half of these guys in politics now. Half of these guys who run this country. That's the impulse. They're like, I will show you guys. You think I'm nothing. Boom. The guys become MP. Boom. The guys running down your country. Boom. What do you do? If somebody just give that brother a hug. If somebody just sat him down and just said, Daddy. If somebody just said, you know, you just sit there, I don't know, I don't care, I don't have the solution, but I'm going to show up every day for you. That will make a big difference. And I'll give you a counter story as well, Moses, to just kind of push on this. One of my, and I give this testimony over and over and over and over again, because I say, give people their flowers while they're still alive. Don't wait for them to die. You know, give them their flowers while they're still alive. The stories of this guy, now he's a bishop, Francis Omondi. Back in the day, he was a canon. And as I'm going through my funeral process, trying to organize a funeral in Uganda for my sister, which is a complicated funeral because she wanted a cremation. And none of the priests in Uganda at the time wanted to do a cremation. And I didn't know what to do. So the thing was like, I was going to get the verses by myself and read them and just basically become a priest for the day. You know, that's how desperate I was. So I have a Bible literally, as I'm calling canon. I tell Canon, but this is the situation, because he had given me a couple of leads, those guys didn't come through. And I said, this is the situation. Can you give me some verses, you know, so at least I don't, you know, because this is the only tradition that I know, you know, the Christian tradition. So give me some verses so I can read, you know, so at least we observe protocol, we have a great process towards the end of this. The brother came through. He just said, listen, you know what, I'm going to come. At his cost, by the way, at his cost. He came through. The guy is based in Garissa. You guys know where Garissa is, man. You know, right? So just to legging it, I mean, it's hard enough for most people to even cut across town, you know, to go see a buddy. You know, this guy legs it from Garissa. I know flights to Entebbe within East Africa are not cheap. Huh? He takes a flight into Entebbe. I meet the guy, and for 2 days, man, this guy stands by my side. And you know, and I tell people, and I write it in the book as well. It's like, I can't remember jack what this guy told me. I can't remember, like, I know he said some inspirational things because he's a deep theologian. He's a really good theologian. Huh? And he says, you know, he's this kind of guys who they start to speak and immediately just start, you know, you bend your head and you want to listen properly. You know, when you lower your head because unataka usikie, you know, because you know something is important. He's that kind of guy. And I can't remember anything he said. But the one thing I cannot forget is his presence. Because every time I looked around, there was a man standing next to me. And it's not like he had a strong face. It's not like no, but I just knew somebody's here. I'm not alone. You know? I've tried to be that in other people, in other spaces in my life. And I hope I can continue to do it so that, you know, I'm not you know, preaching what do you got? What's the phrase? You know, you're preaching wine and drinking water. Is that one? It's preaching water and drinking wine. Huh? Yeah, that's one. You know, I don't want to be one of those kind of guys. I want to be the kind of guy who, you know, when I say I'm on your side, when I say I'm your buddy, when I call you my friend, you know, it's through thick and thin. And that's the journey of life that we hope people could carry. That's why siblings are kind of tight in that way, because siblings do that for us, you know, and especially if you're fortunate, because I realize not everybody has tight siblings, you know, not everybody wants to write about their siblings lovingly. But I was fortunate, you know, I had really good siblings. I still have good siblings, because not all my siblings have passed, you know. But this idea of that I can turn around and the sibling doesn't ask questions, they just show up and they hold presence for me. That lesson is what I hope we can transfer. So I hope I've kind of answered that question. Huh? Bet is asking me something. Let me see what the full thing is. Hang on. Okay, there we go. I love the alternative perspective in that chapter about Moi, a father figure, about the grief that men and fathers didn't know they were experiencing, which stemmed from the Moi era. Okay, say something about it. Okay. So, man, Baba Moi, man, you know, you guys don't quite get it. I mean, people who are not Gen Xers, there's some of the freedoms that people enjoy right now. You know what I mean? Like not the way you can. I mean, the way we can go at Kasongo. You know, Kasongo, one time. You know, Zakayo. Whoo! In the Moi days, my friend. Even just the whisper. I went to University of Nairobi, the university itself. There used to be a place called Nyati House, you know, which if you remember now is right next to, let me get my bearing right. What's opposite Nyati House now? The buildings keep on changing. It used to be, what is the building that had the backless thing? What is it called? It used to have a hotel. What is that thing called? Grand Regency. You know Grand Regency? Okay. So Nyati House is just kind of a few steps behind it, huh? In front of it. It used to be opposite what then was the Libyan embassy, you know? And the Libyan embassy was kind of strange, you know, because it didn't have like a typical front, it had like almost like a window. The reputation of Nyati, so those, if you look at that street, there's Nyayo House you cross the street, Nyayo House, then there's Nyati House. I didn't even know, at the time, I didn't even know anybody who had been tortured there. But even when we're university students, you know, we're radicals, you know, like we are, we're the guys who get out there, you know, we can take on cops. But even as we were passing there, those are kind of kabaridi, we used to call it, like a chill kido, ice. You can't quite explain it, but just there's a dread. Like we lived with this dread. And how do we know this dread? It's not like we had been tortured, you know, like by the time I'm coming of age, which is the late 1997, 96 into 2002, the opposition is now a bit united. There's a lot more agitation. The world order is changing. So we're able to then agitate en masse. But trust me, in the 80s, especially after 82, which is when I come to my age of reason, my age of reckoning, when my eyes wake up and I write in the book and I realize life is not beautiful, that things could fall apart like in an instant, because that's what 82 was. August 1st, everything was fine, then boom, soldiers are fighting in the street, people are dying, parents are wondering how can they escape the country, literally. That's how it was in 82. And then I grew up with the fear, I inherit basically my parents' fear, because the way these guys behave around Moi, Moi would come onto TV, my dad would sit upright. He'll be paying attention, like this guy is speaking, and Moi every day of the week, every Sunday, you know, he's on TV. So he's bigger than life. Right now, we used to sing in the mass choir. I look at people laughing at North Korea, Kim Jong-un, those mass choirs. That was us. Tawala Kenya, Tawala, Raisi Moi, Tawala Kenya, Tawala. That was us. That was us. That was what we wanted to do. That was like the height, that you could be in a mass choir, wagging your finger there. That was us. And then as you grow up older, then the thing that becomes really transit for us is Ouko dies. Now Robert Ouko is like, you know, is right up there, you know, like he's close to power. It's like he's the face of government. He's like the most articulate person. It's like when Moi is being bombarded out there by foreign journalists, Ouko comes there and you know he's lying, but he says it in such a way that's so beautiful, such a diplomat, and you think, nah, man, this guy is smart. That was Ouko. Then Ouko dies, and Ouko dies the way he dies. You know, like when you read the story, you read the history, like he dies brutally. And this guy is still in charge. And Ouko dies like 91. Moi is in power for how much longer? So you can imagine the dread that you inherit, that fear. Then you start to realize that Moism, because now this is the pervasive masculinity model, you're finding it everywhere. You're finding it in the cops, you're finding it in the guys in authorities, and it's also in your father, because it's familiar. Because you're used to this idea of a strong man, a guy who doesn't broke any nonsense, and this is who have become our father figures. That's what we call them, Baba Moi. He was like a father figure. And when I started to unpack it, and this is when after Moi dies, and I started to unpack it, and I realized, damn, Moi was an incredibly huge influence on our life. And if you look at the generation that's now in power, their traits are basically Moism. And that was me then trying to understand that, then what is the responsibility of a father? And what I carried from those years was this. What we held against, the thing is that for the longest time, it was very difficult to forgive Moi. The man, the figure, the myth. Because if you forgive him, then what do you remain with? It's like, and I give the example of a family, and because I saw a parallel in actual personal families. And I say, if you've grown up with an abusive father, like an abusive father, somebody, abusive father, an absent father, particularly an abusive one. An absent one is one thing, but an abusive one, you know? And then you grow up as a man who learns to basically make something of himself, and you're in a position to finally challenge your father. And usually by the time you reach that age, your father is now a broken man. He's probably a man who needs help. He's somebody who's now is weak. And it's very difficult to forgive. Because if you forgive, then what are you left with? It's almost like he won. Because his whole notion was like, I want to break it down. I want to keep you where I can contain you. And then you broke from that fold and you made something of your life. And then your father is there. How do you forgive? This is something we don't know, because it's almost a spiritual element. You almost have to be taught how to forgive. And that, for me, was the complexity I try and grapple with the father figure. Because I'm trying to say that it's not just the man. The man is the man, you know what I mean? It was a difficult time. It's the Cold War period. He's dealing with a lot of realities. We have seen subsequent leaders after that, and we're like, you know what? Yeah, it's not exactly that the new guys have performed any better, you know? Exceptions here. But if you think about 24 years under the circumstances that he was in power, there were some hard choices. So I don't want to judge his presidency as the individual, but what it represented. And how those of us who grew up in that era, what we inherited in terms of the inner traumas that we never dealt with, and we're still learning how to unpack. So that's the point of what I call the father figure. And thank you, Bet, for prompting it. Let me see what other questions are there. If you've just joined us, by the way, my name is Oyunga, and I'm a writer, by the way. I've just published a book. It's called Strength and Sorrow. People know me for a famous column known as Man Talk. They claim I disappeared, but I was just in the background writing and growing. And I've returned with this book, which is like a memoir. It's quite a full book. It's my journey on grief, but it unpacks a lot, from the personal to the national, you know. And I say, you know, grief is political, memory is political, and it's me trying to remember all that we have lost in order for us to find the tools to navigate. And what I hope, what I pray, is that through my story, you can find a mirror to reflect on your own journeys of grief and your own struggles. Okay, I need some questions. Those are some really powerful questions that helped me kind of unpack the things that, yeah, that was a really good bet. Moses, Caroline, sorry, I called you Christine. Caroline, thank you so much for that, huh? Yeah. So, as we're talking about this, I just wanted to say, so I managed to kind of, I'm going to be doing a kind of a book tour. I guess you could call it a book tour. But basically going around the bookshops that are selling Strength and Sorrow. And I'll be, there'll be an opportunity to sign copies. And then just to kind of chat as well, you know. So if you just felt like, you know, we could meet, it'd be a privilege. You know? It's just really nice to kind of meet people who support your work. A lot of these times when you work as a writer, it's very invisible, you know. You're alone in your desk, you know, you're writing, and then you put it out there, you're not even sure anybody's reading it. So it's nice to just kind of meet guys, you know, people tell you, oh, you know, this is a book, I bought your book, you know. And to hear, you know, like, what have you learned? What is the book giving you? What kind of insights? Which is why I'm very grateful to the review I read at the beginning of this conversation from Alphonse, who gave me a really good review that forced me to really rethink some of the lines I'd written and why particularly I'd written them. And it made me realize, okay, those lines were really hard to write, you know, because as I've explained, you know, they came from a place that was quite deep, you know, almost the unexplainable, you know, and so you've got to kind of dig into your depths. Sometimes I say grief is like, it's like, you know, sometimes it's like, there's a famous story that's told of, you might have the parable of Iron John. Iron John, you know, one of these European fables, huh? And, you know, and the backstory is this. Let me just kind of give you a quick backstory. Is that, you know, there's a village, there's a king who is in charge of a small village, basically a hamlet, basically, but a village, and they live next to a forest. And they started noticing that every time people went to the forest, they didn't return. So the king started getting worried, and he put together some of his best men, and he sent them to the forest, and all those men also didn't return. So then they decided, you know what? Nobody's going to that forest, and it became like a forbidden, abandoned forest. So for years, nobody would go there. Then one sunny day, a young man treks into the village. He has a little dog with him, and he says, "Hey guys, is there anything of interest I could do in this village of yours?" And the guys think, and they say, "Actually, you know, there's one thing, yeah, we could do, but I doubt you'd like it. There's a forest out there that nobody goes to, and a lot of our people disappeared there. Maybe you could go check, you know, but it's very dangerous. There's no guarantee that you'll come back." And the young man says, "Exactly, that's the kind of adventure I love." And so what does he do? He goes up the forest with his little dog, and they go and they go and they go, and they find a pond, you know, like a pond. And as they're walking past it, a hand reaches out and grabs the dog and puts the dog in, and the dog disappears, you know, with a yelp, then it's gone. So this guy, and like, instead of panicking, what does he do? He goes back to the village and says, "Hey, king, why don't you give me your strongest men, and some buckets, right? And a big chain." So he goes back to the pond, and what does he do? He grabs a bucket and he starts bucketing out the pond, one by one. It's like, have you ever been in a house when somebody left a tap open and it flooded, and you have to mop it, and you're just doing slowly, and you can't rush this thing. You have to do this bucketing out. That analogy I find is like grief. So when they started bucketing it out, eventually they find at the bottom of a pond a hairy man, you know, filled with hair. And it's the guy who's been living at the bottom of this pond, pulling everybody down and basically pretty much drowning them. And they kind of then pulled him off and took him to a cage, and they chained him up in this big cage, hence Iron John, hence the name of the fable. Now, the metaphor, of course, it's a metaphor for we have this deep suppressed emotions within ourselves that we just keep on suppressing deeper and deeper. And every time things come, what do? They just swallow us. They swallow us. And to get to that emotion, it's very slow work. You know, it's one by one, bucketing it out, which is why I advise anybody who's going through the grief journey, consider spiritual practice. Consider. I'm not advocating a religious prescription of saying, oh, be this or that, but consider. Because you reach a place where you have to go beyond your rational mind, because your mind doesn't make sense. It's like you could go crazy thinking about things like this sometimes, you know? But when you have a kind of a spiritual foundation, there's a place in which you can anchor, even as you back it out, because it's slow work. And each one of us has inherited traumas, inherited grief, accumulated. It's almost like secondhand smoke. You know, when they say don't smoke around babies, you know, secondhand smoke, we inherit these things, you know, and we have to back them out. And it's piecemeal work, slow, gradual work, which in a way is the writing process. To write a book like this has taken me almost 3 years, you know, but it's word by word, line by line, line by line. Now it looks like it's a full volume, but what sits in here, what it took, was a lot of piecework. And in a way, that's the journey of grief, you know? So for those who might be at the start point, who have lost somebody recently, where it's still raw, I say one thing is that, first of all, I say, be kind to yourself. Like, be really, really, really. And I say this especially to the African men, to black men. Really, be kind to yourself, because you're holding a lot more than you realize. And then be patient with yourself. Allow the process to happen, which is why when you have a spiritual basis, which you have something that's more powerful, you come to realize that sometimes you don't have to think it out rationally. There's one metaphor, and if you remember the beginning of my story, where I was saying, I'm sitting in a studio right next to a place where I should have, right opposite the road where I almost died. And this is now what? Almost 15 years ago now. 2010. 15 years ago. I almost died right here on State House Road on a bike, right? And one of the ways I learned to make sense of this absurdity, these paradoxes of life, was a famous analogy that's told by another story. And if you know me by now, you know it. I'm just full of stories. About the Chinese farmer, you know, and there's different versions of this story. But the gist of it is this. Chinese farmer and his son, widowed man, has a son. And they live in a rural part of China. They're not doing too well, poverty. And they have one horse, singular horse, that does all the work, the beast of burden. So one day the horse takes off. And you know, in Amtai, in a small village, everybody's in your business, even before WhatsApp. And they come through and they say, oh, you poor old man, you know. Your horse is gone, how are you going to survive? And the guy says, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. The next day the horse returns. What does the horse return with? With 4 other wild horses. And the villagers return to his house and say, oh, you lucky bastard. You know, now you've got wealth, you've got horses, because horses represent wealth. You can marry a new wife, and you'll be in a good position. And the guy said, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. The next day, his son jumps onto the horse and tries to break one, tries to tame one, and is flung off the back of the horse, and he breaks his leg, and the old men come again and say, oh, you poor bastard. You know, your only son that helps you has broken his leg. What are you going to do? Who's going to be a helper? And he said, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. The next day, the army recruiters come, and they're taking all the young men in the village, and of course they don't take this man's son. That's the thing. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. This is the reality of life. Sometimes those things that we think are really bad tragedies, really bad, you know, like the end of the game, they're actually preparing us for what? For triumph, for good things. All of the tragedies that I've gone through have actually made me a really stoic writer, ironically, you know, have actually put me in a position of strength. All of the sorrow has put me in a position of strength. You know, it's not good, it's not bad. In the same way, sometimes all of the good stuff is preparing you for the bad. You've heard the stories of people who are really prosperous, you know. Then they fell out of fortune and they were taken to jail. And then what do they end up doing in jail? They end up being the most inspirational people ever, you know. They end up teaching people skills, you know. They end up showcasing things, you know, giving people new knowledge, being very helpful. So it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. Good people. I'm just about done talking right now. We've come to the top of the hour. It's about 9:30. So I wanted to close it down. It's been really good speaking to you guys about this topic. Thank you so much for the interaction. Thank you so much just for joining me. All of the people who were able to join me live, those from within Kenya and those who are outside Kenya. The book is out. I'm going on a book tour. I'm going to be signing copies for the next 2 weeks at least. So I'll put out the schedule on my Insta, on my Facebook pages. So look out for it. From tomorrow, I'm going to be in Nairobi. Then later on, I'll go to Kisumu next week. Just because, you know, you have to go Dala. You know, you have to go Dala. You know, all the people will be offended. And then, yeah, so it'd be lovely if you guys could show up, you know. I'd love to sign some books, you know. I'd love to just chat, have conversations. If you feel like perhaps this space is not safe enough for you and you have stuff you want to talk about, you could always reach out to me privately at my email, which is oyungapala@gmail.com. oyungapala@gmail.com. Generally, I'm quite responsive on the socials, so reach out to me. And if you haven't got the book, please check out all the bookshops that were stocked. Test Book Center, Countrywide, Nuria Bookstore, that's in Mombasa, Nairobi, Half Price Books, in all their branches, Prestige, in town, in Nairobi, and then of course I'm forgetting that one, Somanami, yeah, Somanami, there's 2 branches, and then recently now, we're going to be stocked in Lolwe Books, which is a small bookshop in Kisumu, very proud of them, so we're going to be stocked there as well. So you can check it out. And if all that fails and you're a lazy guy, you hate walking around, you can just go to my website, oyungapala.com, and boom, we'll drop it there to you quickly, chap, wherever you are in the country. Yep, so, what else? Let me just finish this. Maybe Rolex, I'll finish this with a comment from Rolex and Danish. Danish, are you in Europe? Django, Jalurs are just, I mean, you have to forgive us, you know. You guys, there's a backstory. Danish is in Europe, and he's asking me, how do I get my signed copies in Europe? I don't know, Danish, you're going to come to Netherlands. But right now, I'm in Nairobi. But I'll try and organize something. I'll reach you on the side. Huh? And then Rolex is telling me something. Quickly, I got to respond to Rolex. You can't ignore a guy called Rolex, man. Let's see. Quickly, Rolex. Rolex was about to leave, but you showed up, man. Oh, damn. Keep on getting this thing. Okay, there we go. So, Rolex is saying, on the matter of family squabbles that get exaggerated during funerals, as brothers, we felt the need to show the presence and to prove okay, that's good. Rolex, do you want me to respond to that, or are you just reading a point out of the book? Not quite sure whether it was a question or just a comment that you actually liked, huh? Yeah, not quite sure. It doesn't quite state. Not quite sure. Okay. Good. Listen, it's been great. Danish, it's been great to see you, Rolex. You posted a picture of the book. I really appreciated that. That was really nice of you. I'm in Nairobi now. I hope I can get to meet you. It'll be nice. For everybody else who's in Nairobi, yeah, let's make it happen. Come through. I'd love to sign your books. Trust me, it's an honor, man. It's just, and I'm not saying this out of, I don't know, just because it's a nice thing to say. It really makes a difference. For someone like me who's been writing for this long, to get the kind of acknowledgement I'm getting right now, for my work to be validated, for all of those years to make sense. And if you read the story, then you realize the kind of struggles I've gone through, my doubts, my frustrations, my lows, and to come out finally to be able to sit in front of an Umati like this, and for people to say, you did good, bro. You did good. We appreciate your work. We see you. That is just special, So if you get a chance, look at the schedule, and if you can get out there, please come through. I'd love to just, take that picture and just sign the books, And then finally, I think I'll end with, just enlighten me. Where is Lolo Bookshop located in Kisumu? God, I wish I could tell you, I wish I could tell you, but I'll put it in the comments later. I'll put it in the comments later where it is, but it's in Kisumu for sure. And Kisumu is not a very big town. At least we know it's in the city center. So, but I'll put it in the comments later, I'll let you know. If you're listening to this, Akan of Lolo Book, Akan, please reach out and tell us exactly where your actual location, huh? Yeah. I don't know. AI with ING, I know it's a Kisumu guy. Do you know where Lolo Books is in Kisumu? Somebody's asking. So please just help us that way. And then Caroline is asking me, is your book available in Nuria, UK? I don't think so. I've got to ask. I didn't even realize Nuria had a UK bookshop. I'm going to ask. UK not yet. I'm going to organize it. I'm a self-published guy, so forgive the slowness of the process. But I figured I needed to serve my home audience first, the guys who really stuck with me, who are guys in Nairobi in Kenya. And then as time goes, I'm getting a little more organized. I'll be able to move books around. So that will happen. But for now, guys, I want to sign out. I just want to say, Asante Sana, thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for the love. Thank you just so much for listening. It's just hard, Sometimes I go hard at these things, But thank you just for listening. Sometimes it's nice to be hard, You're trying to make a point. I'm discussing a subject that's really heavy, Nobody wants to talk about death, something that's taboo. But I'm glad, the people have created space for the conversation to happen. I'm glad people are able to share their own experiences. And I just hope this conversation shall continue. The story is much bigger than me. My job, literally, as an artist, is just to trigger the conversation. And the idea is then for people then to do the same. At the gist of it, I guess my closing statement is this. Ultimately, it's about the power of story, and story as a healing device. What happens if you look at even look at all religion, look at everything in life, it's a story. It's ultimately a story. How do we know? Is that it's really important for us to share stories. Very important for us to share stories. Especially, I like to say, those of us in positions of leadership, parents, as parents or anything else, Please share your stories, share authentic stories, because stories are carried. Sometimes that's the only thing people have. Look at the case of African Americans. What's the one thing they scream about? It's the stories. They don't have their stories. They had to work so hard to retrieve their stories. So those of us who still have stories, share your stories and you'll be surprised. As stories, when you share the story, it lightens the grief. Because you think you're the first one, you think yours is the most unique. And then you share, then you realize, oh shit, it's familiar. I'm not alone in this struggle. Yeah? So share the stories. And finally, I'm going to ask the last question is from Caroline Moses. Where can we purchase the book in Mombasa? Nuria in Nyali. Nuria in Nyali. Yeah? So you can check it there. Nuria. Is it Nuria? Yoyote. Yeah. In Nyali, you know, they've got a branch there, recently opened, I think it's less than a year. Check them out. They give excellent service. I think if you got they also do delivery, so you can just reach out to them. Good people, you know, like in an African tradition, we can't say goodbye. We keep on saying, listen, I've got to go. I'm in Tower tomorrow, so please show up. Let's sign some book. Let's talk, you know. And let's important, let's take care of each other. So good. Look out for my socials for the schedule. And this is me saying, signing out. God bless. And thank you very much.